I'm Kelly Lynham, the head of senior school here at Carey. And before we begin, I would just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we come together this evening. We pay our deepest respects to the elders and ancestors of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, whose country is home to this campus as well as Donvale and Bulleen campuses, and also the clan at our Toonalook campus in East Gippsland. We recognise that the land in which we live, work and play on was always and always will be the land of the First Nations people. And we share a commitment at Carey to connecting to country and strengthening relationships with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, moving forward in ways that can contribute to positive change. So I'm really pleased to welcome everyone to this event here at Carey. There are many people in the room with us who are from Carey families, but others who have come from schools across Melbourne. So we welcome you to Carey this evening. And there are also families joining us online from Kew, from Carey and other parts of Melbourne, but also from Western Australia and Queensland. So we welcome you all to this event. And just before we begin, I wanted to share with you that at Carey in the senior school, we really believe that it's important to do what we can to inspire our young people to really imagine an expansive future for themselves, lots of opportunities that they might consider when they step outside of Carey and into the world. And I personally believe that it's really important for our young people to consider opportunities that they might take up where they can really stretch themselves and test their capacity as a young person. And so, of course, one way that you can do that is to consider studying abroad and taking up the opportunity to study at a school like the University of Pennsylvania. So it's with that in mind that we're particularly grateful to be hosting this evening, and I really encourage you to listen carefully and to consider with your imagination skills where you might be able to be in a year or 2 or 3 years' time. And so before I introduce our guest tonight, I just do want to acknowledge Ms. Amanda Seaver. I think she's outside at the moment, but she's one of our careers practitioners here at Carey, and she's put together this event for us. So if you're a Carey student and you know Ms. Seaver, please thank her on your way out. So I'm really pleased now to pass over to Samantha Jackson from EducationUSA. And EducationUSA is a US government Department of State office. And in Australia, their offices are at the US consulates in Melbourne and in Sydney, and they provide really invaluable advice and support to those students who are considering or wishing to study overseas, particularly in America. So thank you, Samantha, for being here, and we'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Kelly, and thanks to the Carey team, and thanks to Ms. Seaver for also allowing us to host and be here tonight. But more importantly, it's with much pleasure that I'm about to introduce our guest to you, Ms. Elisabeth O'Connell, who has come all the way from Philadelphia and the University of Pennsylvania. We've been really lucky to be involved with Liz for quite some time with EducationUSA. We start giving her a local badge because Liz has been travelling to the region for 20 years. She's been with the University of Pennsylvania for a little bit longer, but we said we weren't going to talk about ages tonight. And with that, when you are applying from Australia, it will go to Elisabeth's desk, and she'll be looking at your application with her application panel and administrators as well. We're going to, how today's going to work, we're going to hand it over to Liz. She's going to share the next hour with our audiences, both online and in person, and she's going to really unpack the process to US colleges. We are absolutely thrilled that you are joining us from all over Australia and in the room tonight, and you are aspiring to apply to US colleges. You are aspiring to be global impactors in the world we live, and everyone at EducationUSA and the US government, US consulate are here to help and support you as well. So if you don't want to hear from me, because you know how to contact me, I'm at the US consulate in Melbourne. What's really interesting, connecting Kelly, Liz and myself is we're all international students that went to colleges. I was there as a Division 1 NCAA athlete for golf, and I stayed there for my undergrad and master's degree. So when I support you families through the process, I come to you from that perspective, while also working in the Australian university sector for over 20 years. So without any further ado, let me welcome Liz to the stage. Her and I are going to share a little bit in today's presentation, so I'll also be popping in and out with a microphone. So, Liz, thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, good evening to everyone, and also for those of you who are joining us virtually from all over the country. It's wonderful to be back. It's been 5 years since I was in Australia last, and I had the privilege of coming here for the last 20 years. But what we have planned for you this evening is, and thank you for those of you who submitted questions, when you registered with Education USA for this evening's presentation. But we want to just take you through, as there's a lot of interest in the process and how we select students and how you apply and things like that. So really want to take you through that, from the very beginning, the kinds of things you should be thinking about. And also, there is a lot of mystery around how universities like ours select students and what goes into that, and a lot of misinformation, quite frankly, as well, because it is very different from what the case is in Australia. So I really want to give you sort of an insider's perspective from that. Explain a little bit how it works for schools like the University of Pennsylvania. Now, you probably know that there are around 4,000 different colleges and universities in the United States. So there really is a university for every type of a student. There's something for everyone. What I'm going to focus in on is the University of Pennsylvania and similar institutions. So you're talking about private, most selective universities. We're also one of the 8 Ivy League schools, which really is the East Coast of the United States, some of the oldest private universities. So it's going to be a little different at some universities, but we want to talk a little bit about that. We also want to talk about funding for education in the United States, how that works. And I guess in honor of the closing ceremony of the Paris Olympics, there are several of you also that have aspirations to be an athlete in the United States and wondering how that works at an Ivy League school. So Samantha is our in-house expert in Australia on anything that has to do with NCAA athletics and colleges, but I'll be happy to provide the perspective how that works if you're applying to an Ivy League university. And then I want to tell you a little bit about the University of Pennsylvania to see if you feel that that would be a good fit for what you are looking for when it comes to that. And but first we're going to get started. And earlier today, when we had, as you see up on the screen, the skyline of Philadelphia. We are right across the river, and it's not the Jara River, it's the Schuylkill River. We're on the western side of the city in an area called University City, where you have, universities congregated, but within walking distance into what you see in front of you, the Central Business District. But I was told that it does have some similarity, the skyline with Melbourne. So maybe that is, something a little bit akin between our two cities. But I think looking at the skyline, one out of many things that you look at when you look at university is location and place, So what you will find, and we'll show some more visual images of that later on, is that you're going to be in an area that's about 10 by 5 city blocks. Where we have closed off traffic to the city, and it's a little more like a park-like atmosphere where students live, engage in activities, classes, research, sporting facilities, and things like that. There are only a couple of things that are not on campus. We have a boathouse down on the Schuylkill River for our crew teams, and we also have an arboretum, and our veterinary school has all the large animals outside of the city, but everything else is really contained on this campus. So what does that say? That it's a very sort of bustling place, because 10 by 5 city blocks, when About half of our students are there for their first degree, for the undergraduate degree, but then we have also 12 graduate and professional schools, you know, America's first medical school, we have a law school, and so on and so forth, and of course a lot of research facilities, teaching hospitals, but it's all right next door to each other, and quite frankly, that's quite unusual for a medium-sized university in the United States to have everything on the same campus and in such close proximity. So that, you know, location is one out of many reasons that sort of encourages interdisciplinary thinking and opportunities for mixing and matching different programs, and everything is just a few minutes away, right? And then the other thing to look at is what's my neighborhood like, you know? So the area right around the university is what caters to students, which you typically find in that type of a neighborhood. But you can be very independent in that Philadelphia is a very historical city. You probably remember from your history books where the Declaration of Independence was signed, and that was in Philadelphia in the historical part where actually our university was first built, because it was built just before the Declaration of Independence. And Benjamin Franklin, whom you also probably know from your history books, was the person that founded the university. But then in the 1800s, we moved west, which was across the river, to what is now the University of Pennsylvania campus. And you know, one of the other things to think about too a little bit is what's the philosophy of the university, and probably the best description I can give you is going back to Benjamin Franklin when he first founded the school, and you say, well, that was in the 1700s. We're in 2024. You know, what's that relevance in today's society? It does have some, you know, and this was just for a new country back in the 1700s, and it was really you go to university to learn theory. But it's important also to be able to apply that to what the real world looks like. And obviously the real world looks very different now than it did then, but also to try and make a difference in the world. And I think if you talk to students, if you talk to faculty, if you look to what's happening at the university, you know, yes, we're proud of our history and we've been around for a long time, but it's always pushing the envelope further. And what does that mean? It's really looking at, you know, one obvious thing, if you just look at what the weather was like when I left the United States, you know, what are we doing to our environment with climate change, you know, and that's very much through the fabric of the institution. You will see it in academic programs, not just within particular schools at the university, but also across programs, you know, is how we're going to solve these problems. We need to think about it from government perspective, from business perspective, you know, how we use technology and so on and so forth. But also the daily lives of students. You know, every one of our college houses has an environmental representative, which is really there to continue to promote, you know, how we're taking care of our planet in the daily life of our students. And you also see that in terms of student activities, and we had Climate Week when a lot was going on across the campus. We can see that now in terms of other fields. You know, a lot has been written about artificial intelligence as an example. You know, the good, the bad, and the new, right? You know, we have you know, as of this year, the first degree program in our engineering school in artificial intelligence amongst the Ivy League universities. But it's also something that gets brought into the classroom in our Wharton School of Business. It's something that's talked about in our liberal arts college because, you know, that will be part of our lives moving forward. And now everyone is trying to figure out how to do it right. But that should also be part of an education. Otherwise, we're not preparing students for, you know, for what's to come. So we celebrate our history. We believe in learning about the past, but we're also always sort of at the frontier of what's happening. Another area like that is data science. You know, one of the new structures, you know, we have buildings from the 1800s, but then we also have brand new structures, is our data science building that opened up this year. And that's something that crosses disciplines at the university as well. Our entrepreneurial center, you know, that is not just for our students in our Wharton School of Business, but it's also for students in other fields as well. So that's just a little bit of, you know, what you will find, but let's move on. Before going into more details about the University of Pennsylvania, I just wanted to sort of bring you back to the beginning. And some of you might be pretty far along. I know one young man who came in has already sort of decided he's going to apply. So clearly, as a year 12, the soul searching has already passed from that perspective. But for those of you who are a little bit younger, you know, you have a whole world out there outside of Australia, and you have Australia as well. So where in the world am I going to go to university, you know, is a good beginning. And before you even start looking at individual colleges, I think you need to answer some questions. You know, we talk a lot about a fit for university, a fit for a particular country. So I've outlined here on this slide, what are some of the things that you will find in the United States? And it's not right or wrong, it's just a different philosophy for the first degree. You know, and going back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of different fields, you know, first of all, you know, the history of liberal arts, a lot of that has grown up in the United States. And we've sort of felt that this balance of education, of having breadth as well as depth, instead of going to university and just studying one subject, is something that's important to be a good citizen. It's important for your future. It's important for a lot of different things. But it also has sort of a practical side of it. If you're looking at how are we going to solve world problems, how are we going to adapt to change in the working world, many people have multiple careers. Many of you are going to go into careers that don't exist right now. How do you prepare for that? You know, and there are certain skill sets and certain exposures, such as critical thinking, working with others who are different from yourself, being able to work in teams, being able to analyze problems, being able to think across disciplines. These are things that you can get from having that type of a diverse degree. Now, some of you might say, well, that sounds fine, but I'm only interested in chemistry and I'm done with the other subjects once I finish secondary school. Well, maybe you should go to the United States, you know, then maybe another country would be more suitable because you're going to find that breadth and depth wherever you go in the United States. And some of you might really know or think you know what you want to study at university, going back to the chemistry student again. But some of you might say, I have no idea what I'm going to do with the rest of my life. And that's quite normal. I don't know what I want to study at university. I don't know what careers I want. I'm just curious. Then the US is the perfect place for you, because especially within the liberal arts curriculum, you know, you don't choose your specialization until your second year. And it's still, and at the end of your second year, and it's still only in many fields, the major, the specialization is only about a third of your degree. About a third of your liberal arts degree is going to be however that university defines their general curriculum. You know, within the Ivy League, it could be everything from a core curriculum like Columbia, where everyone reads the same books, to an open curriculum that, say, Brown University offers. We're sort of in the middle in that we call it structured choice, that we want certain ingredients to be in your broader education, but we give you choices within. So everyone isn't reading the same history course, but you know, we want you to do something in history as an example. And then you have something called electives, and that's what really allows you to mix and match. And we're going to go further into the details of the University of Pennsylvania programs later on, but that's how you can do a dual degree. That's how you can have two specializations or two majors, because it's how you use your free elective subjects. And some just like to take courses in a variety of subjects, and that's okay too. But the point is, you don't have to make all these decisions now. Now, when it comes to professional schools, you know, it depends on the university, what their policies are. For us, we will want you to apply to the engineering school or the business school or the nursing school if that is something that you're interested in. But even within, you're not necessarily making, what am I going to concentrate in within business? Or, you know, what am I going to specialize in within nursing or within engineering? You know, so you still have that degree of choice, right? But that's another thing to think about. The other one is the holistic education, that it's not just I'm going to pursue a degree in such and such a field, but it is really I'm going to have a 4-year experience on the other side of the Pacific And that's going to be the academic side. It's going to be the people I'm with, living on campus, the extracurricular activities that I engage with, the things I do during my breaks. You know, you might have internships, or you might have other activities that you do during your break. And what happens when you leave after 4 years? You know, what is that complete experience like? And that's what you need to sort of reflect on. Some of you might say, you know what, I'm not ready for that at this stage of my life. I'm happy to stay in Melbourne or Sydney or Cairns, wherever you are. I'm happy to continue on with some of my school friends. I'm happy to live at home. You know, that's fine for me right now. And then we might say, well, maybe, you know, but if you're very adventurous, you don't mind being outside your comfort zone, you're curious about trying something different and being around a lot of different people and wanting something that's different from what you would have if you stayed here, then maybe the US is something that would be a right fit for you. You're also going to be with students from all over the world, meaning we also are going to have alumni all over the world. So you're going to be talking about 30,000 alumni from all over the world. So whether you move to Jakarta, or you move to Toronto, or you move to London to work, you're going to find a Penn community. So that's something to also think about. Do you see yourself, whether you go back to Australia or you find yourself somewhere else in the world? You know, we talk about the global relevance of the education that you get. Students move around a lot after they finish. You know, the first 5 years out of university, whether it's graduate school or whether it's through employment, you know, they move around a lot. And is that something that's exciting to you, that you're learning? One question that comes up is, well, how am I going to fund this? The funding works differently in the US than it does in Australia. So we're going to talk a little bit about how financial aid or how scholarships work to support you, but there are resources for that, so that shouldn't be a barrier, but it does take a lot of investment in time and research to be able to look at finding the right universities, going through the application process, but trust me, it's very worthwhile at the end if you think you're a good fit for the American system. We also have extensive resources, and that's not just to stay on top of academic research and providing opportunities for you in that regard, but it is everything about your welfare, from, you know, keeping up, you know, our college houses or dormitories, supporting all your extracurricular activities, having opportunities for global experiences outside the US as well, and also to support you as a student. You know, at the University of Pennsylvania, as an example, once you're accepted and say you choose to come, it really starts with a pre-orientation long before the term begins. You know, we have our international student and some of our university staff. This year it was in Singapore, in Sao Paulo, in Delhi, in Shanghai, where we had in-person orientation for students, and we had a virtual for everyone around the world. And then there are pre-orientation programs where you come to campus. We had an intercultural one where students basically did a camp over a long weekend with American students and international students from all over the world, you know, focusing on global understanding. We had another one where people pitched tents and went out on the Appalachian Trail and camped together, you know. So all of it is for people to come together, because so much of your experience is going to be about people, the people you meet, the people you interact with, and so much learning takes place from being around other people who are not all the same. They think differently, they might have different interests, different backgrounds. We feel that's part of the education as well. And then, of course, you have a whole week of orientation once you begin the university on campus before classes start. But there's also support that goes beyond that orientation period. You know, you have your advisors, but you also have support for everything. You know, everyone has a bad day once in a while, so to know that there's tremendous resources to help you stay successful as you transition to university away from family, from an academic perspective, you know, from a personal perspective, as well as being an international student, you know, adjusting to a new system. So those are some of the things to keep in mind as well. We talk a lot about fit, so here are some examples of things that maybe you should be looking at as you search for universities. What type of an institution are you looking for? A small college, a larger college, a college with a lot of graduate students? What about, we talked about size, location, geography, what kinds of academic programs are there? Because even if there's a lot of flexibility of choice, you still want to make sure that the things you're interested in are at the university, right? So that those opportunities exist. What's campus life like? And also all of us have career sites. What happens with students when they finish? What do they do? Where do they go? What are those opportunities? What is that network like? And all of this is available on our websites and reaching out to the university and through some of the virtual sessions that we have. The financial side, you know, is it a school that's supporting it if you need financial help? Who are your fellow students? What are the places where people congregate? What are the things people embrace and do? Also make sure you go into this process with an open mind. You know, you might have some of you might be very knowledgeable about the US and others might not know more than a couple of institutions that you've heard of. You know, there are 4,000 different colleges and universities in the US, so there really is something for everyone, and there are actually multiple institutions for everyone, so it's important to do your homework. You need to invest the time, but this is something, you know, the process is something that really empowers you, and I'm thinking of the parents in the audience. You know, this is a great preparation for university. When you go to the US, you have to make a lot of decisions. You're living away from home, and starting the application process by being in, so to speak, in the driver's seat of taking charge of that as a student. You know, the family is there to support and encourage, but for you to proactively engage with that is really, with the support of a school, is really, really important. You know, there are three people in this little equation. You know, it is us as a university that's on the receiving end. It is you as a candidate driving the process, and then it's the school that you're attending that is supporting you. We're really empowering you to take initiative, because that's going to then reflect, and we're going to talk a little bit about the selection and application process, is being able to get to know you as an applicant and seeing how you talk about yourself, seeing what you've done and why you've done it, hearing from others. These are the pieces that are really important, you know, and it's also important to try and remove some of the noise around the application, especially the applications to the most selective universities. You know, it is unpredictable what the outcome is going to be, because the reality is that there are a lot of applications of qualified students to fewer spaces. So there is a risk involved, because there's no guarantee and there's no formula and there's no way to predict what the outcome is going to be. But there are tremendous opportunities involved. And, you know, I can just speak for the University of Pennsylvania. We've had a wonderful history of Australian students who have come to us. And some of the comments that they made is, why did you leave home? Well, I was looking for something different. I really wanted to incorporate and continue with some of the things I did outside of the classroom together with my academic journey. I had lots of interests. You know, I didn't mind being outside my comfort zone. I liked taking risks. I had a sense of adventure. You know, I really wanted to do that at this stage of my life. And you know, I'm very, very proud during the time I've been at Penn. The first president of our student government at the university, who was international, was from Melbourne. He had been a leader within the MUN across Melbourne, and he took that off to university. And Samantha, you and I were talking about another student from the area here who had been very involved with debate, and he won it was a $150,000 prize when he graduated to be able to use debate to help students in schools, and actually did that in the Philadelphia community. You know, we've also had wonderful athletes in one of the Olympics. One of, you know, got the bronze at the Olympics was, you know, from Australia as well, from Sydney, you know, and someone who then continued a global career, came back to Australia, and so on and so forth, Students have also taken on a great leadership role in other areas on campus, and students are also very supportive and proud of where they came from. Actually, I will be honest and say that our Australians have teamed up with our New Zealand students, and they started many years ago an organization called ANZAP, which stands for Australians, New Zealanders, Students at Penn. So, part of that is when we have new student orientation and we have 700 different clubs and organizations on campus, and they're always out on our locust walk with the table and, always something special besides the flags, to show the connection. So it's a little bit of home, but at the same time, we'll attract students. We have a number of exchange students who come here. We actually have an exchange program with the University of Melbourne, among others, here in Australia. And, there's a lot of back and forth and interest. And other things that happen too. One of our faculty members, she's Dr. Mueller, she's a professor of music, and she also is faculty in residence at one of our college houses, which is where our students live. She teaches global seminars, which is a popular feature where you're actually working with your professor, and then you are also have an opportunity to travel with that professor afterwards. That's an alternative to study abroad and other kinds of global experiences. But she teaches a course, even though music is her specialty, but she teaches a course that looks at Indigenous populations across the world. And the so to speak field trip that they do is to come to Australia and work with Aboriginals here in Australia and really help sort of educate the students. And that's become a very popular seminar that they've been doing for multiple years. So those are one out of many examples of some of the things that have been going on between Australia and the University of Pennsylvania. But fit is something that you need to look at. The other thing is, we say here on the slide, create a balanced list. You remember we talked about that there's no guarantees, and even if you are a very strong student, it's important to spread out your applications, right? Because there's no guarantee what the outcome is going to be. But if you work with your careers advisor, you do your research, you spread out your applications, that's how you're going to have the best success. So that's really, really important. So just a quick summary of some of the things we've talked about. To start the process, does the system fit? A little bit about the culture and the mission of the college. I also encourage you, when you do your research about universities, to research the curriculum. That's really, really important. Don't just look at the label. And I'll give you one example from the University of Pennsylvania. We have our liberal arts college, where we have an economics degree, but we have many other interdisciplinary degrees dealing with economics. PPE is another example, mathematical economics and so on, but they're theoretical majors, right? And then we have another economics degree in our Wharton School of Business. That's different. That's for an applied learner, someone who wants breadth, but also wants to spend a substantial part of their degree studying applied subjects such as finance and marketing and management and so on and so forth. So, the same one could say about a STEM student, are you more of a theoretical scientist, want to do research, want to be in what would be housed in our liberal arts college, or are you more applied, like engineering would appeal to you as a specialty, right? So those are a couple of things to keep in mind. The other thing is, we talked about a little bit about earlier, what are the spaces of the college? What's the community like? Who are your fellow students? Where do they come from? Where do they congregate? Where is the university located? What is the, what do you have spontaneous access to, right? Like at the University of Pennsylvania, anyone can go out into the countryside, but it takes planning, right? But things that you do in a big city, like you can relate to that, those of you who are in the audience here from Melbourne, are just a walk away, right? And other major cities like that as well. Now, some of you might say, I'd like to be in a canoe out on the river. Maybe, a place like Dartmouth College would be better because, that is more in a different environment out in the countryside or a small college town or something, Some might say University of Pennsylvania is too busy because there's always so much going on. There's a big buzz, and others say, no, I need that because that's who I am. I like that level of activity, So those are some of the things to think about. And then we said before, look at the career site, find out what the outcomes are, where the students go, because that's helpful long-term information. But let's move on and talk a little bit about this, what is called holistic admission, whole person review, contextual admission. There are many names for it, but the whole idea is that it's not just about the exam. There are many, many different things that we look at. What are some of the key takeaways here? We talked a little bit about how do you deal with this selectivity and how do you balance your applications. But one of the fundamental things that we look at is, have you made the most out of the opportunities that you've had in secondary school? And what are those opportunities? And that's both in and out of class, right? And what I mean by that is within reason. There's so many myths here that I want to try and dispel. More is not necessarily better. It's about balance, and it's about well-being, and it's about taking advantage of what your school and your local community have to offer. We're not asking students to add on and add on and add on so that they are so much in overdrive that they have no time to think and reflect and really think about what, where their priorities are. But that's something that's important. And then we also feel that having a group of students in a residential university that have different academic interests, different extracurricular interests, have different backgrounds, they will learn more from each other as long as they want to share with each other and contribute to that community. So that's something we're looking for to build a class, right? And it's not something that you can measure by a formula, but the more you get to know the student, the more you get to know their context, and the more you get to hear from others that have observed that student, the better you'll be able to make an informed decision who you think is not just going to leave with the label because they like the outcome, but who are actually going to make the most out of 4 years of their life, not just for themselves, but for others as well. And that's a very subjective process, right? Common denominator is academic excellence, right? But then you look at all these other pieces. Some interpret that and say, oh, but you must have quotas. No, we don't. There's not a quota for any school in Australia. There's not a quota for Australia. Some years there are more students accepted, some years there are fewer, sometimes there are many students from a school, sometimes there's no one for years on end from a school. It's not a reflection of the school, because we're all focusing on individuals here, right? And seeing how that student fits in for what we're looking at. But let me dig a little deeper. So even the academic piece is contextual. And it's also holistic. So we will want to see how a student performs and the types of classes they've taken, how they've stretched themselves throughout secondary school. So that's an internal assessment, that we would like to see, because so much goes on in the classroom. Like, what do you think it's like being in a seminar class when you're interacting with other students? It's a system of continuous assessment. It's not just about the exam at the end. So we're interested in that, but we're also interested in how might you fare in something that's externally assessed. So if you're following your state system, whether it's taking the HSC or the VCE, or depending on where you are in Australia, or you might be in a different curriculum, such as an IB curriculum. That's context, right? We do want to get as much information as possible. So even though we realize at our university that the ATAR is something that's designed for Australian universities, that's how admission is done here. It's more context for us, right? It just gives us more breadth. We also really work closely with the school, and we want to hear, we want to have a little window into your classroom. What happens on a day-to-day level in the classroom. So teacher recommendations are really important. So make sure you reach out to your teachers early on. I'm sure the school probably has a system where there are deadlines, and maybe a form that you have to fill out that you share with the teacher a little bit of your experience with that teacher in terms of the class that was taken and so on and so forth, or have a chance to meet with your teacher. We also asked the school to send us a comprehensive reference, which is a little bit, what are you like as a member of the school community? And they also put together a school profile, which gives us context as to what's on offer at the school, what's the intake, what's the grade distribution, what is that broader context. So those pieces go into the academic information. If we are what's called test optional still for students looking to apply for 2025 entry, a number of American universities are test optional, meaning that it's up to you if you take the SATs or the ACTs or not. But if you do, we'll be happy to look at them. We don't know beyond the class entering in 2025, and in general, ever since the pandemic hit, there's been so much change when it comes to standardized testing. So if you feel that's not something you want to do, you will find a lot of universities that have no plans of reintroducing standardized testing. But if you want to keep all your options open, there are definitely more universities that either have said for 25 that testing is coming back or are talking about it for the class entering in 26. So keep your antennas up. Make sure you check the latest information, because there are some changes. Will that then stop and the rest will stay test optional? Time will tell, right? But this is something to keep in mind. For those of you who do take standardized testing or plan to do it in the future, that has never been the most important academic piece, because the most important academic piece is always what you do in the classroom. What happens on a day-to-day basis over a 4-year period, right? That's the most important. Testing is an additional piece of information, but not the most important relative to other academic pieces. Extracurricular involvement. So we talked about balance before being really important, and relative to what's on offer and what's going on in your life. We have students who have a very long commute. We have students who've shifted areas. We have students who have responsibilities at home, or things happen, right? That's context as well. And what we're looking for in terms of extracurricular engagement besides balance is a sense of commitment and continuity, whatever that might be. There's not a preferred activity. Clearly, some students are going to have several interests. Others might go deep into a particular area that takes a lot of time. But we want to know what you've done, so the what has to be there, but we're very interested in the why. Why have you chosen to be engaged with musical activities or theatrical activities or sports or MUN, whatever it is that interests you? That's really, really important to us. And we're also interested in how you've impacted the space that you have occupied. And I know that this is not like it was in 2020 and 2021, with the, COVID, but I vividly remember students being very anxious at that time because the choir wasn't singing, the sports teams weren't playing, and students were virtual, and someone said, well, I'm a captain of a sports team, like, how are you going to evaluate that? We're not playing. And it's like, well, so you're in uncharted territory, you're still a leader of a team, and how are you sort of keeping that team together? What does that say about your proactivity and engaging others? And teamwork goes and moves in so many different places. Engineers need to be good team players. As an example, it's not all about the STEM fields. So we're really interested in having a better understanding of that. We talked already about recommendations and their role, and then comes your part, which is we want to get to know you. And our university and many others, about 1,000 other universities, do use something called the Common Application. So there will be a personal essay. And there's another place where there's a lot of myths, and people write books about, this is the essay that was written that got you into X university. And that's simply not true. What is important with those essays is your self-reflection, which you should do as you look for the best fit university. And this is an opportunity for us to get to know you in an authentic way. What might you be like as a member of our community? What is it? What story can you tell? And I think no matter where we come from, universally around the world, storytelling is something that exists. So think of it as your story, which means no one can pick your topic, no one can write your essay, because if so, you miss the point of the essays to start with, which is to get to know you as a person, right? And there's no perfect essay. It's just an essay that fits you so we can learn something about you, right? So don't remove yourself from the topic. It doesn't have to be about you. It can be about your opinions, but don't remove yourself from the storyline, because then, again, we're not getting to know you. And the Common App will have, multiple topics that come out. I think it's February of every year. So you have plenty of time before the application deadline. And then don't underestimate the importance of university questions and essays, the supplemental essays, because there comes the question, why have you chosen to apply to that university in the first place? What is it about that university that is interesting? Right? Do your homework, do your research, and don't see it as a place to copy our websites or our handouts and flyers. You need to internalize all that information you've gathered and then give it back to us in your words. What is it that excites you or interests you, depending on what the question is? And it might not be academic in nature. It could be a sense of community, or it could be other, and some questions are quite esoteric as well. So all these pieces come together. Then there's also some supplemental information. Some universities will have essays and, will have interviews either on the campus virtually. Some will have alumni conversations or interviews, students applying to music and art and things like that. So we're going to take a quick look at this. This is a sample of a common application with activities. And here you see a student who's been involved in musical activities and speech and debate. Just take another look at this page and look at some of the additions and think of us as readers and how we will learn much more about the impact that you've had, because we're looking in terms of activities for how have you impacted that space. So we have a lot more to work with here. So that's just a quick example. We've talked a little bit about the test optional, and we're going to talk a little bit later about deadlines as well. But I did want to spend a few minutes to talk about funding, because that's a topic we have not discussed yet. So in the United States, you're going to find two different general types of funding. One is referred to as merit funding. It has nothing to do with the family's financial circumstances. It's all about you, what you have on offer to the university, and how the university wants to give you a scholarship because of that. It could be academic merit, it could be sports and athletic scholarship, it could be music or what have you. And that's referred to as merit. None of the Ivy League universities give any merit funding. Merit comes in admission, and funding comes based on financial need. So where that's probably most confusing to families is for those who are interested in Division I sports at an Ivy League university and sort of say, oh, I want to apply for an athletic scholarship. And I know several of you asked that question. We do not have athletic scholarships. That's how we were actually formally formed in the 1950s, because we agreed to play against each other and only offer need-based financial aid, but still at the Division I level in a number of sports. So that is still alive and well. So you can come and be a Division I athlete, compete at the highest level. We had 12 athletes from 6 countries in Paris, and the Ivies, I think, together had like 120 athletes in Paris. But financial aid is based on different factors, right? But it also means if there was ever a reason that you were injured or left the team, that financial aid does not go away. It's always with you because it's based on need. It's separated from the athletic side. Then you need to read the fine print at universities, because even the need-based financial aid institutions, some will have loans, some will not. We are part of a small group of universities that do not require students to take loans, meaning you will graduate with your first degree without any debt. We'll also meet the need 100% and adjust it at any time that is needed. It's always happened once a year, but it can also be adjusted if something happens, big exchange rate changes or changes in employment in the family, that type of a thing. And full need means not just tuition and fees. It means everything that it will cost for you to go to university so you can fully experience a residential campus, be involved, be part of exchange programs, et cetera, right? So we can really help in that regard. For students who are international, we, together with most of America, with the exception of a handful of universities, are need aware. So that does mean that we will look at that in the admissions process. But on the other hand, the good news is that we have one of the largest budgets in the country. So there are a number of students that do get financial need offers. So that's a little bit how financial aid works. There's more details on the website in terms of forms you need to fill out and deadlines and things like that. So I'm not going to go into that in a lot of details. I just want to spend a few minutes with a quick overview and some visuals of the campus, and then maybe we can talk a little bit about the timetable, because I know that's another important part. So this is our part of our new student orientation. This is the first formal exercises when everyone sings the school song and comes together on the green. Just to refresh here, what are some of the things to think about? We talked about the University of Pennsylvania. Do you want to be in a city with a campus at a medium-sized university? We talked about us being an Ivy League school, and we talked about Benjamin Franklin. This is what the center of campus looks like. This is Campus Green. Remember, we talked about it's a little bit like a park surrounded by a city, and you're 15 minutes on foot. You have a train station on campus that takes you out to the airport, and also for train travel, it's a little over an hour to New York City, a little longer to Washington, D.C. Why does that matter? Because you can be independent. America is a car society, but you can function very well. Philadelphia is discovered on foot. We have sidewalks. Trust me, there are many American cities that don't have sidewalks. So coming as a young person to Philadelphia, you can be very independent, and there's a lot that you can explore. Here's a summary again of the undergraduate schools that we have. You apply to one of them unless you're in a dual degree program, and we have over 90 different fields of study. And we talked a little bit how that works between the schools. Classes come in different sizes and in different settings. We talked about the global seminars we have. You could be out on the green in the spring. You could be in a lecture hall. There are many different types of classes that you have. And we have a college house system, as I mentioned earlier, where you could live in a building like this from the 1800s, but with updated plumbing and air conditioning. We need that thanks to climate change. But you could also live in a modern building that was, an apartment from last year and everything in between. The key here is the community within a community, living with faculty, having advising, even some classes taught in your house. So you might be in different programs. Your roommate might be an engineer. You might be studying history. And this is one of your communities, right? And you're going to have your extracurricular community. You're going to have some of the other communities, dining halls and other facilities for students. We also have a number of non-residential communities, spaces that bring people together. This is Perry World House, where a lot of our international activities take place. Next door to that is Kelly Writer's House. Next door to that is our community service civic house. Up the street from that is our entrepreneurial center. Down the street from that is our research hub. Down the street from that is our performing arts center. So these are places where people congregate and new ideas and initiative take place with student input. So that's an important part of the university. And we talked a little bit about the clubs that we have. And we talked about the sports opportunities, which is everything from what we call intramurals, which is houses playing against each other, to Division I sports. And we celebrate things. Our South Asian community, especially our Hindu community, brought Holi to Penn, which is a big celebration of spring for us, where everyone comes together on campus. And this is what we call commencement, which is really our graduation. It's the commencement on the rest of your life. That's another tradition everyone walks down Locust Walk on campus to go out to our field for the main graduation ceremonies, and the professors applaud their students along the way, led by bagpipes and a big procession of flags, which is an exciting day on campus. And this is just a very brief summary of the university. There are so many opportunities for you to explore further. We do have our YouTube channel, and a little hint, we do have a number of recorded webinars on everything from our perspective on writing the college essay to sessions with international students and selective admission sessions and things like that to learn more about the school. Lots of resources on the website as well for you, and ongoing sessions. And also I'd suggest, if you haven't, to sign up on our mailing list as well, so that we can stay in touch with you if there are other activities that we think you might be interested in, that you want to pursue. So on that note, I wanted to, Samantha, to bring you into the conversation because I just wanted to go through the timetable a little bit. So if you decide to apply to the university, there are two deadlines. One is called early decision. Now, what that means is that you have not just decided which university in the United States is your first choice, but which university in the world is your first choice if you are accepted. And you're sort of putting your foot forward early, November 1st, so that you will have a decision around the middle of December. Now think of the Australian calendar here, right? And that means if you get an offer, you will cancel all the other worldwide applications. So it's a huge commitment, but it's a great way to know early if you know where you want to be, right? The regular decision deadline is around the 5th of January, so it's after you finish your exams. And then all the 8 Ivy League universities will pick a day in late March where their regular decisions go out. And American universities in general will have May 1st as the date when you have to reply. You know, if you have multiple offers, which university am I going to attend? So how about Australia though, Samantha? How would you recommend for a student who's on an Australian calendar to fit into that?
Can we just check the date? You said most of the applications announcements come out March 1st?
No, the end of March, the end of March.
So generally come out end of March or April 1st. So let's backtrack. Early decision, November 1. What happens in November, folks? If you're in Year 12? Exams. Now that doesn't mean you're still writing your application, but that early decision is November 1. So that means you need to be organised quite a few months beforehand to go, I'm going to do early decision. So you need to realise that you need to put a professional application together that you have ready 48 hours before the deadline, because if something happens and they crash, and that happens, you need to give it a couple of days to get there. And if you forget anything from Australia, you then have a chance to be contacted by the school. So then the early decision deadline will come in December, and then you will say, great, I've got into my number 1 offer, which means you need to withdraw your applications from Australia. And then you go, but America's not going to find out. If America does find out, they can actually remove everything from you if they know that you're accepting offers in Australia. So please take that seriously. And what happens if they find out that you've done that and they go, oh, you're a Kerry student, you actually jeopardise future Kerry students applying to institutions. So that early decision is really an important element. I love it that it's organised. So if you've got a number 1 dream school, that's when Americans use early decision as well. But if you've got, you know what, I've got a couple of schools, then maybe early decision is not right. If you happen to be a student athlete in the room, you may have coaches that say, we want you to come to our school, but you need to come ED, which means they're showing your hand. And if you're happy with that offer, then apply early decision, because it's a binding agreement. Now, not all schools will have early action, but often it's the same deadline, November 1, November 15th. They tell you at the end of the December whether you've been accepted or not. That is not binding. You can sit there with your American offers and your Australian offers and going, okay, what do I want out of this the most? Regular decision is quite interesting because most students in Australia go, you know what, I've got more time to put together my application because it's not due until
till January. I can decompress a little bit after year 12. I'm going to do January. They traditionally don't tell you until April 1st the outcome of that admission. Now, universities in Australia start March 1, and then census date is March 31st. So that's issue number 1. If you also decide to start at an Australian university, some US universities can say you're no longer a freshman, you've started at an Australian university, we will no longer treat you as a freshman, now you have to do 1 year of studies before you may be transferred to our institution. So what's really important is that if UPenn is on your list, you say, hey Liz, I need to get on with my life. I want to start at my Australian university until they come out in April, how would you treat me? She may say, that is fine, but as soon as we give you the admissions offer for regular decision, you've got to withdraw. So it's really important to identify the US colleges on your list, how they will treat you. Because if you start in Australia, then you may be actually eroding that opportunity to apply to US colleges. Does that make sense? So there's nothing wrong with applying to Australian universities, maybe deferring and then seeing where your outcomes go and going from there. But back to Liz, because I'm sure she can add some addition.
Yeah, I think that it just underscores how important it is to read the fine print and the look at the website and obviously reach out directly to universities if it's not clear, if it's not mentioned there, because things do change also from year to year. But you know, it is one common application, but it is not one common decision. You know, every university has different policies, and that has to do with everything that we've discussed. So this goes back to being very organized. There are research tools there, starting with the commonapp.org, where you can find out about various things for the 25 entry and keeping track of that.
Liz, do you also use the coalition at UPenn?
We do.
Now I'm going to say, coalition, what's that? If you are sitting in the room and you're a media student or an art student or a music student, then you may need to consider using something like the coalition, because you can upload media as part of that application and part of that review. So again, it's about identifying what is going to show your story the best. And Liz has, clearly articulated, all the universities have their own rules. If you apply to any of the University of California schools, they won't let you use the Common App. You've got to use the University of California portal application. So now, if you're going to apply to UPenn and you're going to apply to a California school, that's 2 different applications you need to write. So again, it's about being organised and structured and identifying what applications you need to prepare.
And you mentioned University of California. That brings up also there's rolling admission, right? And for most universities, that is rolling, but first in the door, it gets the decision, right? So in some places it gets even more selective as you move along because you don't have that many spaces left. So again, read the fine print and hear what the university's take is on it.
And we want to be dream builders with you. We don't want to be dream crushers. But when we're talking about examples of selective admissions, some of these schools are getting over 100, 120, 150,000 applications for 3,000 spots. So when we're talking about selectivity and under 10%, that's what some of the data is saying. So we're not saying don't apply there because it may be your perfect fit. But if it's not your perfect fit, it shouldn't be on your list. Okay, it's about diversifying your list. And I think one of the things you've got to decide is, are you happy to stay at home and just commute to an Australian university, which are very, very good, but your friends are probably going to remain as your high school friends, not your university friends. And I can say with hand on my heart is that Australian universities don't have a heartbeat. And what you're deciding about is American universities have that heartbeat, have that campus life, have that athletic pride, and have those colours. And if that's something that you're sitting in the room tonight still saying, that's what I'm attracted to, then you continuing in the process, I think is really important to continue going down.
And I would only sort of wrap up by saying that there are so many free resources out there for you, and how important this relationship with the schools are and the opportunities that you have in the school. And it is work, which is why you start this process early. You don't want to be thinking about what am I going to write my essay about and doing research to answer some even esoteric questions on the supplements and the application when you're in the middle of trying to wrap up your state exams and your final year and things like that. And also the rites of passage being your final year of school, right? There's a lot of fun activities. You don't want to miss that because every single weekend you're working on college applications. It can be avoided if you plan early. So keep that in mind. But I really empower you to be in the driver's seat of this, and it will help you because we will get to know you better. You will come across as a more authentic student in the sense of what you're saying is really representing yourself to us, so we get to know you better, and it will fit in better with what we're hearing from your teachers, from your school, what we're seeing that you have done. You know, sometimes there are these senses of working towards perfection and getting too many opinions on things, and all of a sudden your soul is not there the way it began because there's too much interference. So just don't fall into that trap. And you know, there is so much that you can successfully do on your own. So please trust that. It's going to pay off in the end. And there are no guarantees. Lots of things you do in life that carry risk, but if it is something that's worthwhile and you're getting encouragement from your school that you have the grades and the marks and the rigor and so on, and it sounds right, just make sure that you spread out your applications so that you're not putting all your eggs in one basket, and listen to that advice and give it a try. But want to wish you all good luck, and I think we're sort of towards the end of the time frame for our virtual audience, right?
That's right. For our online audience, thank you for joining us all over the country tonight. We so appreciate you joining us. We do hope it was helpful. If this is the first EducationUSA Australia event that you came to tonight, I think you've been incredibly empowered with some information, and I think information is knowledge. So to our online audience, thank you so much. Follow and like our Facebook page. I know young people don't use Facebook anymore. I get it, but I work for the US government, and us sharing anything in real speed is just as difficult. So like and follow our page. Just don't tell your friends you're doing it. And then we will have this session uploaded on our YouTube channel in a couple of weeks. To our audience here in the auditorium, stay with us. We'll turn everything off and we'll have a Q&A. Thank you so much.